Orientalism is the pattern of stereotypical representation by Westerners of Middle and Far Easterners as primitive others.
This week's readings are Orientalism by Edward Said and Orientalism and the Binary of Fact and Fiction in Memoirs of a Geisha by Kimiko Akita. Edward Said is a Palestinian-American theorist. He is also a political activist and is the author of this week's reading, Orientalism. The reading critically analyses the division between the Orient and the Occident. Said emphasises the myth of the Orient, saying the Orient is not an inert fact of nature, but is a man-made concept, just like the idea of the Occident, where, just like the West, the Orient is an idea that has a history and a tradition of thought, imagery and vocabulary. Said states that the relationship between the Occident and the Orient is one of power, domination and varying degrees of complex hegemony. It's important to understand Orientalism as a discourse that has been constructed largely through Western views. Often in the media, Orientalism is shown in varying ways that generalises and stereotypes groups. These are some dot points that generalise the concept of Orientalism. Aladdin is an example of how Orientalism is shown in today's society. The show is set in a far, far away land. The main character is an orphan who is less privileged. Jasmine's sexuality is repressed as she's not allowed to marry just anybody. The tyrant would be Jafar, and there is a sense of magical quality represented in the flying carpet and the genie. These types of examples are often projected in Western society and are considered objective knowledge, as Orientalism is a constructed stereotype that does not represent reality.
Many people have criticised Said's theory of Orientalism. Bernard Lewis is one of these critics, who believes Said is anti-West and that his work is political propaganda. Wang Ning discusses an opposition to Said's comments on Orientalism. She says the texts Said discusses are mostly from the English or English-speaking world, rather than from non-English-speaking or other third-world countries. Comparative literature is not only cross-national and interdisciplinary, but also cross-cultural and cross-linguistic. Ning describes Occidentalism as a ghost, which has already haunted Oriental countries like India and China that have long cultural traditions. In different places, Occidentalism manifests itself in different forms. In the Middle East and Arabic countries, where Islamic culture is dominant, Occidentalism manifests itself as an antagonistic form that strongly opposes Western hegemonism. This can be represented by the United States and sometimes even evolves into large-scale armed clashes. Ning shows several examples of this, with the Libyan-American antagonism several years ago, the Iraqi and Allied forces conflict, and the Iranian-American conflict. Within these events, the Occident is constructed as an other, and the Occidentalism in the eyes of the Oriental is characterised by the Third World anti-colonialist and anti-hegemonic tendency.
Akita uses the example of Memoirs of a Geisha, the 1997 book and the 2005 film of the same name, as an example of modern Orientalism in practice, particularly in America, and how the book and film targets the West and its preferred audience. Many in a Western audience would have ignored or not realised the fact that many of the leading Japanese characters were played by Chinese actors, and that characters' makeup, movements and deportment, as well as the settings and the scenes, were culturally inaccurate. Western audiences bought into the story of the fictional geisha, while Japanese audiences did not. Memoirs of a Geisha did not create a geisha boom in Japan. What it revealed was an overwhelming sense of postmodern American Orientalism, America's appetite for the Orient. It constructs the Orient as a place with people who could be described as strangers, others and outsiders. The word Orient is not only a Western word, but a Western construction. It is a place unknown to the West, a place to be explored and colonised. The fascination with the geisha by Western audiences began in the 19th century, when they viewed them as pretty, submissive creatures wearing exotic robes and hairstyles. Orientalism shows the West as believing itself to be more culturally advanced and sophisticated than the Orient. It is thought that the West objectifies the Orient, viewing, photographing, studying and consuming. Both the book and film of Memoirs of a Geisha reinforce this binary between fact and fiction when it comes to Orientalism.
Created using Powtoon.